by our speaker today, Dr. Brahmanand Mohanty. He adopted a sustainable lifestyle back when the idea of sustainability wasn't exactly in the mainstream, right? Like not of us, many of us even thought of it as a solution. And his logic for a lot of his lifestyle decisions, in a lack of better words, just feels logical when you think about it. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Brahmanand Mohanty to this session, where we will demystify some of the general myths around sustainability and sustainable lifestyle and understand his choices and reasons behind it, right? And as a matter of fact, through all of our impulse sessions that we will be doing on a week-on-week basis, we will have the one question that comes to the end where we ask the speaker what exactly their impulse moment was. So yeah, sir, please go ahead and give a brief introduction on what you're doing, and by then I'll share up the screen sharing.
Good afternoon and welcome to all the participants. Namaste. Thank you for this introduction. I was asked to talk about sustainability issues a couple of days back, and I immediately said yes because I felt it was mentioned that some people are hesitant, they're not very clear about why they should invest in this type of projects and what's actually sustainability meant for them. So what I have done is to put a few slides together. I'll take you through it to try to make you understand what I understand by sustainability and how it can be linked with the quality of life. So I have linked quality of life and sustainability together. I would like to set the scene by asking this question: are we living in a fool's paradise? All of you are familiar with what it means. Then I'll go through 3 acts as if it's a play. Acts means action. The first action is to get more with less. The second one is to shift from products to services. And the third one would be the change. I will go through them more in detail as I go through the slides. So starting with, are we living in fool's paradise? I'm not very sure how many of you are familiar with this concept of the overshoot days. Some of you may not know about it, so I'll just briefly mention what is this overshoot day. It's basically if you take the earth as a resource and we draw our resources from the earth, earth has a certain capacity to replenish itself. So in a particular year, the earth has a certain capacity to replenish, and that much we can take from the earth. But unfortunately, due to our change of lifestyle with the population growth, we are now drawing more than what we need. So basically, we are drawing from the future. For example, this year's quota, we tend to use it up very quickly, and we're starting to use next year's quota in advance. As you know, in banking system, this will not be acceptable. But Earth as a whole has been quite cooperative, but gradually we can feel the stress. So you can see this is a country overshoot days. If we lived like a person from, let's say, Luxembourg or United Arab Emirates, if everybody lived and consumed like someone in United Arab Emirates, we would use up our yearly quota by the month March. In the first 3 months itself, we would be using up our quota. So you can see the different countries are shown in this from January to December. And the last one you can see in December, Indonesia. Indonesia just manages to balance more or less because only few days are left. So if everybody lived like an Indonesian, we would be able to more or less manage. But you can see India does not appear here in this overshoot days because an average Indian's consumption is within this Earth's capacity to replenish itself. So that's a very good thing. But overall, that's not true because our population being very high, you do have a stress. But if you consider the whole world as one, and if you have an equitable share of resources, then every Indian who is consuming certain amount of resources is well within the limitations that we have from the Earth. Having said that, if you go into more details, we'll see it's more complex than what I've just explained to you. So this is something that you would have seen in different places. Everybody live like an American. We require 5 Earths and so on, you can see. And India is at the bottom. Today, this is not up to date because this data is from 2018. And there's obviously few years gap. What I showed earlier when we talked about the overshoot day for 2021, that was actually the data for 2017 because it takes a few years to process the data to get the actual situation, the actual scenario. So on the right-hand side, you can see carbon footprint of an average person from Finland is about 10.4 tons carbon dioxide equivalent per person per year, whereas for India, it's about 2. And this is an addition of various types of activities. The first one at the bottom is for nutrition. You can see in Finland, they generate about 2.1 tons of carbon dioxide for nutrition. Then comes housing, 1.3. Then mobility. Then consumer goods, 2.5. And finally, leisure and services, 1.8. So you can see India generates less than 1/5 of what a normal Finnish person generates. And the carbon footprints are likely to change. These are the targets which are set by the negotiation that we've had in COP21 in Paris. And the yellow lines show how the levels are going to drop with time. So if you want to remain within this 1.5 degrees Celsius rise of Earth's temperature, the dark yellow line that at the bottom that we can see, we need to bring it down to that level. So you can see, even with our low consumption, we need to make efforts by 2040 or so. We need to make efforts to reduce our present carbon emission, which is a tall task because, as you have witnessed, it is going on increasing every year. But as they say, statistics hides more than what it reveals. This slide shows something much more interesting. We have seen average Indians' consumption. Here we can see what is the carbon footprint of, it's only for households. I'm not talking about the overall consumption. Indian households, and we have got 5 columns. The first column is showing people who are at the base of the pyramid, the poorest of the poor, who do not spend more than $2 per day. Okay? And their emissions are of the order of only 0.19 tons of CO2 per capita per year. Whereas the top 20% is something like 1.32 tons per CO2 per capita per year. Those who spend about less than $5, let's say $5 and more, which is about 400 rupees, those who spend per day for food, electricity, gas, public transport, private transport, medical care, education, consumable good, etc. Now, I can safely say that all of us who are attending this webinar are within this category. You know about this Pareto principle, 20% accounting for 80%. This is a typical example of how the top 20% actually accounts for 80% of the emission of the country. So when we are feeling proud to say that our carbon emission is low, it is not true. That means we already have adopted lifestyle similar to an average Finnish, considering the fact that our consumption, household consumption, is about 7 times more than the poorest. It's about 1.32 tons of carbon dioxide per capita per year. Our lifestyle is very much comparable to many of the European countries. So you can see, if we want to maintain this lifestyle, and the next plot, which is there between the 4th column, they are trying to rise to a higher level. There, you can see there is a huge difference between the 4th column and the 5th column. That the 4th column is coming up very fast to catch up with the 5th column. Okay? And that's going to create a huge problem. I will not be able to manage to reduce our carbon emissions by 2030 or 2040. That means we cannot guarantee to maintain the rise of temperature to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius in future. Okay, so you can see average is 0.56, whereas the top 20% is accounting for 1.32. So unless we go into the details, sometimes the statistics do not actually reveal what is the actual situation. So we have seen what the challenges are, Okay. So when I said we are living in a fool's paradise, we are trying to console ourselves saying that we are well within our limitations. We are well within our quota on an average. But if you look into the details, 20% of us are already accounting for a huge share, whereas all others are below. So our concern should be, what do we need to do to reduce our emissions? At the same time, how do you help those who are at the bottom level to come up? Because of certain reasons, they are not actually consuming so much because of the lack of resources, and particularly they don't have the capacity to actually spend that much. Okay? So the first act, I wanted to give a brief overview of how do you get more with less, because our present system is highly inefficient. The way we use our resources are very, very inefficient. What we use finally is about typically 1 to 10% of what we actually take from the nature. Okay? So overall, if you look at the whole chain, okay, so we need to have a whole systems approach to understand where our losses are. And if you realize that, then we can change the way we use resources and make them much more efficient. So I'll start with first, how do you get more with less, with an example, with a concrete example. I could give you many, but with the shortage of time, I will start with the first one. So you can see, if you take the case of petrol and diesel cars, okay, I've shown you the price now is, petrol price is above 80 rupees a liter. Okay, so if you consider, let's say about 15 kilometers on an average drive with 1 liter, then we are paying something like 6 rupees per kilometer using a petrol car. When you're using an electric car, using electricity coming from coal-fired power plant, the fuel cost is something like 1.5. So about 4 times drop in cost per kilometer. When you go for solar-powered car, okay, our fuel cost comes down to 0.75, because what we pay for the running cost is practically nil, where there is a capital investment involved. So you can see, as we move from petrol to diesel car to electric cars, our capital investment changes because we are spending more on the capital investment in terms of batteries and the system. Whereas when you go for more solar powered cars, we are investing further on solar investment, whereas our running costs are much lower. So what changes is, how do you find that capital investment to shift from petrol car to electric car to solar powered cars? How many of us are actually aware that the petrol that we use, the oil that is coming from natural resources, as a natural resource, what percent of the energy of that oil is actually driving the car? Okay. Some of you may know it, but most people, including the engineering students, when you ask them these questions, they're not very clear about it. If I say only about 10% of the energy is actually driving the car, it won't be wrong, because the engine itself has an efficiency of 20 to 25%, because when the engine is running in a car, it's not the same as a diesel engine in stagnant condition. The regime of engine is changing all the time, and about 2/3 to 3/4 of the energy is actually going out in the exhaust, okay, as waste heat. So what we are left with is only 1/4 of the energy that we supply to the car in the form of petrol. So here you can see, when you're using oil, typically we are using per kilometer. Everything I brought to same unit, because when you're using oil, it is petrol or diesel. When you're using electricity, it's kilowatt hour. I brought everything to kilowatt hour to be able to compare this. So typically for every kilometer, we use about 1.35 kilowatt hour of energy from oil when you're using a diesel or petrol car. The moment we switch to electric car, even if we use grid electricity, our consumption comes down to 0.35 kilowatt hour per kilometer. So what we have achieved is a factor 4 improvement. Okay, so our efficiency of energy use has gone up by 4 times. That means with the same amount of energy, we're able to get 4 kilometers instead of just 1 kilometer. But when you move from coal to solar, our energy requirement is only 0.1 kilowatt hour per kilometer. Okay, so we are achieving what I call a factor 14. Okay, so a 14 times improvement in the way that we're using electricity. So for various reasons, I will not be able to go into all the details, and I don't want to make it too technical. so that you can understand that the moment we move from oil to electric car, we are achieving already a factor 4. And that's the reason why we need to go for that. Apart from the other benefits that we all are aware of, the pollution problem in the urban areas, okay? And the depletion of oil resources in future. Okay? But with coal also is the same story. So the only solution that is more perennial is how to go for renewable energy sources so that we can continue to provide the resources needed to maintain our lifestyle. Okay? At the same time, we achieve much higher percentage of efficiency. So this is just an example. I could give you many other examples. So when you come to coal-fired power plant, the electricity that is delivered to us is only about 1/4 of the energy that is going into in the form of coal to the power plant, because the power plant also has an efficiency which is about 1/3, that 35%. That means 2/3 of energy in the power plant is going out as waste heat in the power plant itself, apart from the transmission, distribution, and other losses. So we can analyze each of our systems, whether it is electricity that we use, whether it is the vehicle that we use every day, whether it's the water that we use. I could do the same analogy and show you how inefficient our whole systems are. So the challenge is, how do you bring in efficiency in the system by which we can get more with much less resources? That way we can stretch our resources, because we live in a finite world. We can stretch our resources to live quite well for foreseeable future. The next one is, how do you shift from products to services? We live in a world where we want to possess everything, okay? Whether it's our house, whether it's our car, whether it's our two-wheeler, okay? So we want to have more and more products. We want to have, you can see the consumer goods are going on increasing, okay? So that is also creating a problem, because when we use more products to manufacture each product, we require a lot more resources from the nature. Okay? And mind you, the products that we use, we don't really use them in the most efficient manner. Okay? Take, for example, when you buy a car, typically we would use from anywhere between 1 hour to a maximum of, let's say, 4 hours per day for our commuting. Okay? If you're living in a big city and you have to drive for long distance, you might be spending even up to 2 hours. So we use only for 4 hours. So the capital investment that we have made is only being used for 4 hours. That is about less than 1/6 of the time in a day. So 5/6 of the time, these products are remaining idle, of no use. So if you continue to use our products in the inefficient manner, first thing, our capital is not best way utilized. The other way is, we are going to consume more and more products, and over a period of time, we're going to create more and more waste. So that's also going to create further problems. So we need to look at, how do you change this business model? Instead of owning things, how can you go for services? When we talk about products to services, we are looking at how to bring in what we call the economy of functionality, or some people also use the word servitization. Okay? How do you go away from buying products to buying services? Okay? So functionality is coming in over ownership. Okay? So we'll provide services that will satisfy the user's needs without really having to own the physical product. This is what is happening already. A very good example is the Ola services that we use, or Uber services that we use. We don't have to own a car. Okay? Whenever we require services, we can get access to it. The next thing is to maintain it, to extend the life. We think about, how do you make sure that it's properly maintained, repair, or warranty. So we can extend the product's useful life by ensuring that there's a proper repair and maintenance, okay? Which is taken care by people who are professional, who can do it much better. The next one is, instead of buying, we go for rental services or leasing services. I can rent it for a monthly basis, or I can even rent it for an hour, or like it's already happening in some of the cities, I can rent a bicycle for 10 minutes for my last mile connectivity. Okay, so the people who provide these services, they retain the product ownership. I don't have to own it. I don't have to take care of it. I only get the services whenever I require it. Okay, so they own the product and they guarantee the services. And mind you, this is done in a very decentralized manner. So that means it's not just one company doing it at one point. It is creating networks so that in smaller cities, in the districts, in zones, you have people who are providing the services in terms of providing the rental facilities and also taking care of the repair and maintenance. That way it is creating jobs, employment opportunities at decentralized level. Pay for results. So basically, we only pay for the result. Okay. If I own something, if it breaks down, I have no way of taking care of it. I have to go and get it repaired. And during that period, I don't get any service. Okay. Whereas when you're going for this type of models of services, if the vehicle is not working, I'm not going to pay for it. So whoever is providing the services, it's of their interest to make sure that the things work and they work continuously. Okay? So by doing so, they're making sure that the same vehicle, which would have been lying idle in my home or in my office for hours together, is being utilized by many more people. In the process, it's reducing the number of vehicles on the road. The parking space is freed, and the same vehicle is being run. As a result, the person who is providing services can reduce the cost of services, and we don't have to own it. We just benefit from the services. So the idea is, how do you go for products to services? Many fields. This is happening not only in urban context, it can also happen in rural areas. For example, instead of a farmer owning a solar system to provide water for irrigation, because the farmer may have a small parcel of land, particularly we know we have many marginalized farmers. Instead of owning it and using it whenever they require it, it is possible now for several farmers to share one system. Okay? Somebody will provide the services, make sure that it works. Otherwise, what's happening now, if a farmer buys something, nobody is there to maintain it properly and repair it. If something goes wrong, the farmer has to run to find someone from the urban areas to come and get it repaired. So when you provide this type of services, you create the infrastructure, you train the people locally so that they can provide this type of services. One option, as I mentioned, I can own a car, then I am responsible for maintaining it, taking care of it. So I have the option either own it, or I have multiple options now. If I want to reach my destination on time, I don't take my car. I just find a motorcycle on the street. I can reach on time every time. I will never be delayed. Instead of taking 1 hour to reach a point, I can easily reach in half an hour. I can have a dependable ride because I can just call and the vehicle will be available. I can even choose the type of vehicle I want for my comfort. I can go for the best driver if I'm willing to pay for it. So I have multiple options. I can even go for a luxury ride by choosing something which is much more expensive, so that at some times I need to show that I can ride for a particular occasion. For example, it's a wedding, or if it's a party, birthday party, I can go for a luxury ride. Instead of thinking about owning it, for the last mile connectivity, I can have a three-wheeler which is taking me from the metro station to my home in a safe, clean manner. Okay, so you can see if I own a car, I'm stuck with it. I have to take care of it, and I'm not making best use of it. And there is no return on investment when I own a car. It's more of a liability than an asset, because I don't get anything out of it apart from having the facility to go anytime I want. But with the new options that are available now, I would question myself, why should I own a car if I have all these options available? And depending on my whims, depending on my requirements, I can choose the different options, and without necessarily paying more money, because I'm not investing in the system, I'm only paying for the services. And the last one, I many other points, I've just restricted myself so that we have time to discuss. The last one is, we have seen it's possible to get more with less. And instead of just thinking of having more and more, we can find new models which are already coming up the market. Now, how can we be the change? Okay, Mahatma Gandhi, today is his death anniversary. He said, you be the change that you want to see in the world. So how can we be the change? He also said that the rich must live simply so that the poor can simply live. And I'll try to give you an example why the poor are not able to increase their quality of life. They're not able to afford some of the services. Okay. Now, I can just ask you a very simple question. How much does a power company charge you, the urbanites? I guess all of you are from urban areas. How much does the power company charge you for a unit of electricity, a kilowatt hour? It can vary. It can vary because, again, electricity is subsidized for most of the residential consumers. In commercial, it can be high. A place like Mumbai, it can even go up to 10, 11 rupees. Okay, and people start cribbing that, oh, I'm paying 10 rupees a unit.
Yeah.
But if you look at what about the villager who doesn't have access to grid electricity, how much do they pay for that unit of electricity? So if they want to listen to a radio, the only option that they have is to have battery powered radio. A small radio like this would require 2 small cells. So we require, let's say, 2 2A batteries or AAA batteries. A typical battery would cost you, let's say, about 15 rupees. These are not very good quality batteries. And 2 batteries would cost you 30 rupees. The energy that it contains is 3 watt-hour. That is 3,000 of a kilowatt-hour. Okay? So if you bring it down to a unit price, a villager is actually paying 10,000 rupees per kilowatt-hour. How many of us have really thought about it? And we are cribbing when we pay 10 rupees a kilowatt-hour and we say that it's already too much. Okay? Whereas a villager pays 1,000 times more per kilowatt-hour. The only difference being a villager would not be using a kilowatt-hour. The villager uses what we call a pico watt-hour, a watt-hour, or less than a watt-hour, because they would make sure that they make this battery last as long as possible so that they don't have to go back and buy these batteries. So with a set of batteries, they can make it last for, let's say, 2 or 3 months before they change the batteries. So they use this resource very carefully because they know what price they pay. They pay 1,000 times more. I can extrapolate the same thing for various other resources that we urbanites enjoy without having actually to invest in it, because we make the decisions, because the bureaucrats and the politicians all live in cities. We are the decision maker. We make sure that the investment comes from the government in most cases, okay? Because our power utilities are mostly state-owned, and electricity is just given to people, and they're paying only for the operational costs. And the same thing if you look at water resources. Okay? According to the National Statistics Service Office, the survey shows only about 21.4 Indians have access to water supply. Okay? And even in urban context, because there are lots of slums where there is no water connection, there is no piped water connection, about 40%, that is 2/5 of urban households have access to piped water, whereas when it comes to rural households, hardly about 11% have access to piped water. Our independence being in 47, even after 70 years, this is the situation in the country. And what could be the possible reasons? I have just written there are 3 key issues. The first one is lack of capital to invest in appropriate infrastructure. Okay? We just don't have enough capital, in the sense that the government does not have capital. It doesn't mean that we don't have capital, because the private sector has capital. People have the money, but the government doesn't have the capital to invest in infrastructure. And one of the reasons is being, whatever capital that the government puts in these type of resources, there is practically no return, or the return is not enough to make it viable. Okay? So the mentality of many of the public services is to give fish instead of teaching how to fish. We have not helped people to learn how to do fishing. Instead of that, the government would be thinking about how to give free facilities for people to take care of their needs. Obviously, we can see in the last few years, this trend is changing, but we are still a long way to go, because whenever the elections come, again, even the political party which wants to make the changes goes back, because they will lose the vote bank if they're not giving out things free. Okay? And the last but not least is very poor accountability. Okay? Many of us will concur that how many of you actually have seen your water being billed? That means somebody coming to read your water meter to charge you. Okay? In many cities, there is no water meter reading. So it's a flat rate which is charged irrespective of what you do with the water. So the potable water is used for all purposes, to cleaning the road, cleaning the cars, and many other purposes, which would not happen if we account for every liter of water that we pay for. Okay? You can see very good example. If you go to a restaurant, you can pay 15 to 20 rupees a bottle of water. That is 1 liter. Whereas in most cities today, we pay maybe up to 8 to 10 to 15 rupees per meter cube. That is 1,000 liters of water. So you can see again the same analogy that I've given for batteries. Okay? we can be paying 1,000 times more for having potable water in the restaurants, whereas the government feels we cannot pay for the water and keeps it very, very low. For urbanites, and again, you can see rural areas, there is no water supply for people. So you can see the tax that we pay, actually, we are getting the maximum benefit out of it instead of it's going to the people who actually need it. So having seen that, now we can try to see in what way, if you have understood the causes, if you have understood what are the challenges, in what way we, the people who are in the fifth column, can change the way we do things by which the people in the first or second columns can get more benefit. How do you help them so that they're able to consume more resources and have a better quality of life? And they're not able to have it now because they don't have access to capital, technology, etc. So we have, the onus is on us to see, first thing, how do you reduce our column where we are emitting about 1.32 tons of carbon dioxide per capita per year. In food, again, when I talk about food, 30% of the food or more even, according to statistics, is lost between the farm and our plate because we don't have the right infrastructure to take care of it. They rot, they will get wasted, rodents eat them. So there is a lot of losses. So imagine all the resources going to actually producing those food in the field. For example, how many of us know that to produce a kg of rice, we require more than 2,000 liters of water? Okay? So every time we eat rice and throw a few grains of rice, that means you're throwing away a few liters of water because that's what has gone into to actually produce that rice without taking into consideration the losses in the chain. Okay? Next slide, please. So you can see we have a responsibility in terms of how to reduce our emissions, because it's not only everybody is going to be affected by it. It's not that rich can hide, because it's going to affect all of us when the climate change takes place, because we will not be able to control our weather patterns. As a result, we will not have enough food for everybody, and will not have enough resources to take care of our requirements, because we are running out of resources with the way of the models that we have adopted today. So thankfully now, like Paise, we have several significant roles being played by young startups. Okay? You can see the government is supporting them in many ways to come up, but it's not only the government which can support them. We also have a role to play to support them, because they are in the forefront in finding the solutions to reach out to the people, those who have no access to these facilities, these amenities, through innovation, through technology, and by using the information and communication options that we have today, thanks to the access to internet, Internet of Things, etc. So what is required at present? If we just depend on the government, it might take us decades, and we just don't have the time. And you have seen our targets are 2030, 2040, etc. And we would have run out of our options if you don't do enough today. Okay? So what is needed is now people's participation, particularly us who are at the top level, to mobilize the capital needed so that we can materialize the ideas of these young startups into reality. Okay, so I hope I have given you a brief overview of why we need to act, and without sacrificing anything. We still have a good quality of life. It's not by consuming more that we become more happy. Happiness comes from the way we do things. And we have to create that without necessarily having to own things. And we do have options now without owning. We can find new models by which we can carry out things at a much lower cost, and we can free up some of the capital to support some of the startups who are helping to provide facilities, provide options for the people at the bottom of the pyramid. They're also providing, creating jobs in a distribution manner, particularly the people who are, again, have less access to capital, those who don't have enough. And in the process, as you can see, each of these innovation is also helping us to reduce our carbon footprint and impact on the global environment. So with these, I would like to conclude, because I would like to leave a few minutes for questions and answers, our discussions. I would like to also hear your views.
Thanks a lot, sir. I think that presentation brought a lot of perspective into the equation Because what a lot of us do is, we understand that a problem exists only when we can relate to it. And the examples of, like the last time we discussed the same examples, right? The example of the whole drinking of water from a packaged drinking water system, where we give 20 rupees for a liter, we ration that more than the water that comes out of our tap, right? Because we relate to that problem, and now we understand that there is a genuine issue. We have quite a lot of questions that have come in terms of the whole idea of sustainability and making it accessible for people along those lines, right? So I think we can have a little bit of a conversation around that for now. The first question actually is from my side. Is that the last time we spoke, right, and we discussed this issue, we told that you spoke about a value system that needs to be built, right? And solving this problem is more about building that value system. So how exactly do you go about building this value system, and what should a person like you or I or anyone else in this call do to build that?
I mean, to explain that, I gave you that slide which shows how in our society, who is using how much of resources. And the same thing, very recently you have seen Oxfam coming out saying during the pandemic, actually the richest people have increased their wealth, whereas the poorest people have lost their livelihood altogether. Okay? So this is a fact, but unless you see the numbers, okay? So that's the reason why I spent a little bit time on that slide to show that all of us who are today on this webinar, all of us belong to that top 20%. Okay, I can safely say that all of us belong to that top 20%. And the number I showed is an average. And amongst us also, there'll be people who are consuming maybe 2 or 3 times more. Okay? I know in my own case, whenever I traveled, if I took those emissions to account, it would be much higher. Okay? So it's not in my daily consumption. Every time you take a flight from India to Europe, for example, you offset the whole thing altogether. Okay? So you can see already we have become conscious. Like in the last, let's say almost 7-8 months, I have not gone out of my town. Okay? Whereas earlier, there was not a single week or a couple of weeks where I had stayed in one place. I had to travel continuously. But I see that it is now not only me, even the people with whom I work, it is possible for us to do things without necessarily to travel. Okay? Right. So that itself makes us conscious that there's a lot of things that we do superfluously. We can avoid those, and those have costs, and those who have impacts on the environment. Okay? Right. So the value system I talked about is being aware how privileged I am compared to so many others. Okay? We are not only in India, all of us, those who are in this webinar, we are at the top, let's say, very safely, again, I can say, we are at the top 15% of the world. That means there are about more than 6 billion people below us in terms of having the facilities, the resources, the access to all that we're getting, education, etc. Okay? So we should feel how privileged we are, and it becomes our responsibility. Keeping in mind that, if we want to prosper, with whom are you going to do business? If the whole picture is skewed and only there are few people at the top who are rich, with whom are we going to do business? Where are we going to generate our resources? So actually, it is morally first thing important for us to make sure that those who are at the bottom of the pyramid come up. But also economically, it makes sense because without them, there's no market. Okay? It cannot be only a market for few people. Just like, developed countries do collaborate with developing countries because they realize they are very small in number, but they cannot do business. If they cannot do business, they cannot survive. And that's why they try to help the developing countries in bringing technology, etc. So in the same way, we have an onus to make sure that the gap reduces, and at least we ensure, of course, we don't live in a world which is fully equitable, but at least we try to make sure that those who are at the bottom of the pyramid, the worst of the worst, come out and have a dignified life. And that's our responsibility. Okay? So that is the value system I talked about.
Right. Right. Thank you. And the other question that we have is, so someone says that I don't have enough money to adopt any of these sustainable solutions, right? He says that I'm on a salary. I earn a fixed amount of money. I don't think I live in an apartment. I don't think I'll be able to buy, solar panels for me to get electricity, nor do I have the money to invest in, let's say, an electric scooter or an electric vehicle that way. Right?
Yeah.
So this is pertaining to the product that we also have. So the startups example that you've given,
Yes.
how effective or logical it is for him to be able to invest in scooters, let's say that is being used by someone else, right? Like the example that you've given, and still go out and say that, hey, listen, I have actually created impact, because technically he does not sit on it, nor does he ride on it. It's basically a scooter that's being owned by someone, operated by someone else, but he has invested in it. So what exactly is the impact created there?
I will not go directly to answer your questions. I would like to just talk about sustainability is not a destination. It is a journey. Okay. So each time we can do better. So when somebody says, I cannot do anything because I have a fixed salary, that means we are fooling ourselves, because there are lots of things we can do without necessarily investing. Okay. For example, can I do something to reduce the amount of water that I use? Can I do something to reduce the waste that I generate? Can I do something to reduce the amount of electricity that I consume? And this can be done, a lot of it can be done through behavioral changes, and that doesn't require any capital investment. Okay? But in some cases, you do require some investment. But I give you a simple example. In your house, in front of your house, you have a light burning whole night because you want to make it secure. Okay? You want security, you want safety. So you provide a light which is burning the whole night. Today, the technology allows you to have a lamp which is sensor based. Okay? And that will cost you maybe 250 rupees. It's a one-time investment. Okay? If you're salaried, I'm sure you can always find 250 rupees, because if you take your family out for lunch or dinner, you spend much more than that. Okay? So if you replace your normal lamp by this lamp, 95% of the time, your lamp will be off. Whenever somebody is coming in, when you're going out, coming in, it will immediately light up. So the purpose of the light is taken care of. You're putting it for safety, security. You are worried about a burglar coming in. But when a burglar comes in with the lights on, you would not know when the burglar comes in. But if it's in dark, if somebody comes in, then you would see it lights up immediately. So you start worrying, why is the light on? Then you can take action. Okay? Right. So this is just a simple example as to how we can make small investments when we are aware of the type of resources that we're wasting. Okay? And I told you the cascading effect, when you start from the coal and the electricity that we get, we have a lot of losses already. Plus the lamp itself has a loss. Okay? And if you are using that lamp only for 5% of the time every night, imagine the life of the lamp which is increasing. So the investment that you have made in the lamp is a one-time investment. It will last you at least 10 times longer than a lamp which is operating throughout the whole night. Okay? So there are lots of multiple benefits. We should not only look at the initial capital investment. We need to look at the overall life cycle cost. We have a tendency, okay, to mostly make our decisions on the basis of like what we call the tip of the iceberg. We judge something by looking at the iceberg. What we see is only the tip of the iceberg. We don't see what is underneath the water. Okay? And as typically what we see in the iceberg is only about 1/9 or 1/10 of what is there at the bottom. Okay? So when you make a choice to buy something inefficient, okay, we will incur much higher cost in its lifetime, and we're using much more resources. So this is just an example. So it doesn't mean that we have to immediately go and buy a scooter or put solar panels. There are many other ways by which can do things. You can see, I'll just tilt. You can see a fan on top of my head. That fan is called super fan. The fan costs practically a double of a normal fan. Okay, but the benefit of putting that fan is it consumes about 30 watts. A normal fan would consume 60 to 70 watts. So the moment I've replaced it, I've divided my consumption by 2. And it uses a technology by which whenever I reduce my speed of the fan, I'm economizing a lot more energy. Okay? Whereas the normal fan will just dissipate it as heat. Okay? So when I've done this, direct benefits are I'm saving energy all the time. So my bill comes down because these are going to my top level. As you know, residential sector also, as you have slab rates, as you go on the higher slabs, you pay more. So when I put a fan, I'm reducing actually from the higher slabs. So I'm actually offsetting my high price electricity first. Okay. Now the indirect benefits, again, we look at it. Many houses, though it's changing with the time, we do have what we call inverter. Okay, the inverter is there, or UPS, uh, uninterruptible power supply, because our power supply is not always reliable, it's erratic. So we go for a UPS. In UPS, we use a battery. Okay, how many of us realize that every time somebody who is coming to ask us to change the battery, we can easily pay 12,000 rupees, and the battery can store only about a kilowatt hour of electricity. And typically its lifetime is maybe 500 cycles or 1,000 cycles, even let's say 1,000 cycles. That means for every kilowatt hour that is storing to give us, we are spending 12 rupees on the battery itself. Okay? Whether you use it or not, we are using that much money. Now imagine if I change this fan, when the power fails, with the same battery, I don't have to put another battery. With the same battery, I'm able to operate 2 fans instead of using 2 batteries. So 2 batteries, each battery will cost me 12,000 rupees to increase the capacity. Here, with changing the fan, I may spend about 2,800 to 3,000 rupees. And you can see the benefits I get. It's not only on standby, it is giving me a return all the time. So I could give you many other examples. So sustainability is not just aiming for big things in the beginning. Let's start small. Let's learn. Let's see the benefit of it in terms of economics, in terms of social benefits, in terms of environmental benefits, what we call the triple bottom line, people, profit, and planet. And we can gradually adapt things as and when we go ahead. Okay? So we always would say we don't have enough. That's the human nature. You ask anybody today, do you have enough? We say the definition of enough is what I don't have today. So a salaried person who earns, let's say, 20,000 rupees today would say, I'm a salaried person. The same salaried person who earns 1 lakh rupee would still say, I'm salaried, so I cannot do things. So if you make it a point to say that, let's say 5% of my money, I will use it for some other purpose, okay, by which I will develop this notion and I'll appreciate the benefits that I'm getting from it. And I'm creating a new value system that I adhere to. And in a way, I'm helping the society to also progress in a more positive manner.
Right. That's great, sir. So there are 2 questions that I think are interrelated. So I'll go and ask you both the questions, and I think you can probably connect the answers to the 2 and make a conversation from there. So first things first, I think it's a question that I asked you before too. Does becoming sustainable basically mean I should leave all my worldly pleasures and become a monk or a saint? Right? Because that's the notion that people have by saying that, hey, listen, I should cut down on my uses. When you say that I should just go with what I need, should I just leave everything that I want? Right? And the next question that I have, I think, which is a logical continuation of that, is when you talk about lifestyle changes to make you more sustainable, it's more about building new habits, right? And new habits don't come out overnight. So you need to first do it consciously, saying that, okay, let's assume I'm in my room, I should turn my AC off, and I should do that consciously, right?
Yes.
And open my windows probably.
Yes.
After a while of you doing it over and over and over again, you start doing it unconsciously and it becomes a habit. Now, technically, building habits are always difficult, right? Even losing habits are difficult. On a daily basis, if a person was supposed to start thinking of these very minute things, right? Maybe turning off the lights or using enough water. Now, just in this webinar alone, we saw examples that we could relate to. What exactly did you do initially to be able to, live the lifestyle that you're living right now? How were you initially conscious about the things you did, looking for examples? And then how did it become unconscious for you? Right? So the first question is about whether you need to be a saint or not.
Yes.
And the next one is about this.
Well, I mean, there is no absolute value to say that I am sustainable and somebody else is not sustainable. It is every individual's journey. Okay? I would define what my needs are. My needs may be different from your needs. Okay? It depends on many factors. It's my upbringing, where I am, where I live, many other factors come in. Okay? So within that context, what can I do? And particularly when I'm conscious that I am privileged compared to many others. That is what that drives people to say that, well, I can do something to change my behavior. I can tone down. I can bring some modesty in the way I live. Okay? For example, just because it's the social norm, you have to have in a wedding 1,000 people coming, and you have to show that a lot of food is wasted. Then you say that I can afford it. Okay? But we can change that. There can be other ways of doing it. I can have a wedding where I can make sure that the guests that I want to invite come there, but I would make sure that they have a good time, but there is no scope of making waste. If I know exactly how many people are coming, then I can plan accordingly. I will tell them, if you are not coming, please inform me, and explaining to them why I need to do that, so that there is no wastage of resources. So you can see in our day-to-day life, there are lots of wastage that we don't notice, but we pay for it, and that also has a cost. Okay? So to answer your question, there is no absolute term. Okay? I live in a house where we have designed it to be bioclimatically suited, so that we don't need to use a lot of energy to be comfortable. But at the same time, I live in a climate, there are periods when I will sweat when I come out of the bathroom. Okay? So we do have air conditioners. We do use air conditioners. So you might say that, how is it that you are looking at sustainability and using air conditioners? But I make sure that when we use air conditioners, air conditioner is the second choice. First is the fan. When the fan cannot meet the requirement, then I go for air conditioner. And when the fan is operating, air conditioners, I don't need to set it at 21 degrees. I can set it at 28 degrees. So it's more close to the outdoor condition compared to if I set it at 21 degrees. And when an air conditioner is operating at 28 degrees, my energy consumption would be less than, let's say, 50 to 60%. So I would be reducing my consumption quite a lot. I'm comfortable. At the same time, I'm conscious. I'm not using too much of energy. Keeping in mind, every time I run my air conditioner, I'm evacuating the heat and throwing it outside along with the electricity. Okay? So I'm creating a heat island around me, and those who can't afford it, they will be feeling it much more. Okay? So that consciousness that my action has an impact on others makes me do things in a different way without necessarily sacrificing everything. Okay? If you want to bring down to a common denominator, we don't want to go back to the Soviet regime or the Chinese as they were in the past, okay? The communism, where everybody was the same and nothing happened, and people, all of us lived in poverty. Okay? So capitalism has a role to play, but it has to be balanced by having this consciousness that people at the bottom of the pyramid need to be taken care of, and I have a responsibility to be conscious about it and be more modest in the way I use resources, and including money for that matter.
Right. And so we have RKM Prasad, who says that services could be costlier than owning an asset sometimes. Government role is providing services at economical prices will go a long way in minimizing the wastage by owning. Lockdown taught us how to live with minimum requirements.
See, we need to understand that government cannot do everything. The role of government is governance. The word government, it is governance. The government has no role to take over the role that it should be played by non-government, including private sector. The private sector has a role to play and not the government. When the government start doing that, and you can see, okay, there are more and more government servants. Okay? And there is no accountability in many cases. Okay? And I give you an example. You look at water systems, the water supply system that we have in most cities. Okay? Are they really accountable? Is there a payback period? Is there a return on investment? They're all money which is sunk, and this is all public money which goes into it. It's not the government generating from somewhere. Okay? So the private sector can do it much better and bring in efficiency. But the role of the government is to make sure that there's a level playing field and people are not taken for ride. The private sector also makes a healthy profit to survive, but doesn't do it in such a manner that it's profiting a lot more at the cost of people. So that is the role of government. But if you expect the government to take up everything, the government should not be there for electricity supply, for water supply, for road. It is the government's role to plan, to govern, to provide the facilities, and let the private sector come in, because where is the money with the government to do all these things? Okay? So when the government is trying to do that, as a result, there is no money for healthcare, there is no money for education, which are much more important. And that is where the government's role is much more important: healthcare, education, etc., and not so much for infrastructure. And when the government comes in infrastructure, we expect everything free. Okay? So there's a lot of losses. Whereas in the private sector, you can easily hire. If the resources are priced correctly, automatically we take care of them. As I mentioned, if you buy a bottle of water, you're not going to use that to wash your car afterwards. Okay? Whereas you get it so cheap that we don't care, we just take a hose and wash our car. Okay? Similarly, if the resources are correctly priced, you can see many of the private sector areas, we hire people to make sure things are maintained properly and there is no losses. So the model that we need to adopt is to hire people to fire the losses and not the other way around. Unfortunately, the government role now is to see how they can collect more tax from people. As a result, the private sector is not creating jobs because people are taxable. The private sector is taxed to create jobs because you have to pay their salary plus the overheads, etc. But if you change the model and say that we will tax more on the resources, all others than human resources, you will find things will change, more people will be employed, and we won't have such high unemployment rate that we have today, because we'll be employing people to make sure that we plug all the leakages wherever we have to ensure that our resources are very efficiently utilized. Okay? So there's a lot to do. Obviously, government has a role to play. Unfortunately, all the policies are not necessarily long-term, because most governments are thinking about short-term. They're remaining in power for short-term, so they cannot think in long-term. It's again for the citizen to make sure that we give that opportunity to the government to make long-term decisions so that we can benefit and the whole country can benefit in the process.
Right. That was well put. So we have Swarnajit Bhattacharjee, sorry, who asks, does sustainability affect the standard of living negatively? And this, I think, is very related to the question of the previous question that we had, which was about, do you really have to become a monk or a saint to give out your worldly pleasures and then live your life, right? So I think it's along the same line.
Yes. Means are different. I mean, I'm not saying that everybody has to become poor. What I'm saying is we help the others, we tone down. I use the word modesty. Okay? We need to bring in modesty in our life in all ways, in the way we behave, in the way we treat others, okay? In the way we respect the others. Okay? Whether it's somebody is working in my house as a house help, I should also treat them respectfully. Okay? In the same way, I should be compassionate. I should be having positive vibration in the manner that they also feel that I care for them. Okay? And there are ways through which I can do things. And I give you this example, how the startups are coming up with solutions. In the rural areas, we don't need to wait for the government. Today, there are startups who are looking at how to bring in the pole change in the rural areas, and not necessarily to sell this. They're ready to provide services, but they need capital. Okay? And the capital need not come from bank where the conditions are very harsh. It can come from you and me, whatever amount of money we can put in. Okay? So there is no minimum amount that we need to put in. It can be given freedom so that people can, just like you do social investments, it's up to people to see how much they can afford to put aside, and they will have a healthy return, because we have seen how much actually these people pay for the services. I gave you example of electricity. Okay? Rural people are actually paying 1,000 times more. If we can bring them solar solution and bring down the cost of a kilowatt hour from 10,000 rupees to even 100 rupees a kilowatt hour, we have already achieved a factor of 100. Okay? Even if it's 10 times more than what we pay in urban context, and still they will be able to pay. Okay? So how do you create those type of business models along with the new technologies, innovations that are coming up, so that everybody can win through the process?
Right. So I have two questions. I know we've gone a little ahead of the scheduled time for the webinar, and I thank everyone who's on the call for sticking around. we have two very, I think, important questions to ask. Right, one of them is something that I had personally. I thought I'll probably throw a googly at you during the session and not ask you previously when we spoke.
Okay.
But so ideally, we have this concept of credit score in banks. Right? So when we take loans, we have a credit score that ensures that we stay on track. To say that, listen, I'm paying my loans on time, and whenever someone lends me money, then I'm accountable enough to pay it on time, right? Because of my credit score. Um, do you think that we should have a system in place, something that would give someone a carbon score, right? For an ability for the individual to be keeping track of the carbon they emit and the carbon that they offset? Do you think a system like that would actually be necessary, or would actually drive people to be more sustainable, or do you think it's more of pressurizing people, and I don't think we should be able to do that?
I mean, especially as you've seen, when you are in a business where you are aiming for the triple bottom line, people, profit, and planet, it is very important that you give out that information in a transparent manner, that people are encouraged. They see actually the action, the decision that they're making has an impact in terms of profit, in the return in the investment, creation of jobs, and impact on the environment. So without a dashboard, we don't see things clearly. Imagine you're driving a car without a dashboard. You might be thinking you're going at 60 kilometers per hour, but you will be speeding and you can be fined for that, and you can have an accident. Okay? So a dashboard is very important to know where we are going. In the same manner, as I said, whether I earn 20,000 rupees a month or I earn a lakh of rupees per month, I can make a principle that I set aside. If I'm earning 20,000 rupees a month, I can make a principle saying that I will set aside, let's say, 5% of my income. Like for savings, people do it. I'll put it in this type of ventures where it is giving me the same return as I would get it in a bank, because I don't want to risk it. But at the same time, I see the benefit in terms of social and environment. Okay? If I'm earning a lakh, I'll be able to keep 10% aside. I'll go for it. If I'm earning more, I can go for more percentage from it. Okay? So everybody, according to their convenience, comfort level, can decide what percentage. That becomes a sort of a discipline, just like a dashboard. We make it a point that every month I will do it. Similarly, every month I need to know what has been the impact of the money I set aside. Okay? In a bank, we just get what is my amount. The bank tells me already, I put the money, this is what I'm getting. Okay? Like in your case also, that's what you're doing. But to me, that's not enough reason for me to invest in an organization. I would also like to see what type of social benefit it has, what type of environmental benefit. That way, I would feel I'm doing my job. I'm conscious enough to see that indirectly I'm also doing something which I cannot do as an individual, mind you. As an individual, I cannot reach out to different places to do these type of things. Right. First thing, as a startup, you are bringing that economy of scale. Okay? If I invest in a scooter and try to run it, it would be a failure. But if you are going to collect money from 1,000 people and start in a city, you are able to bring that economy of scale. You are able to provide that after-sales service. You are able to keep track of it and give me the information, okay? Which as an individual, I cannot do it. And that's why I like these ideas of whoever is taking the lead, which I cannot do, somebody else is doing for me. Okay? The little bit that I can do is to keep aside that money, to put it there so that I see the benefit, not only in terms of financial aspects, but also social and environmental aspects. I'm doing something positive. Okay? It's not for somebody else, it's only for our own conscience that we are also contributing directly or indirectly on these type of things.
Right. And I'd like to close this with one last question, which is basically the theme of the conversation we're having, right? What was your, trigger point or an impulse moment that you had probably back when you were studying, right? Because you did take, you did a lot of your study around environmentalism and sustainability. What exactly was your trigger point to say, hey, listen, I think this is the problem that I should look at, right? Or I should start my journey, because you obviously had a starting point for this. What was a trigger point or a story or an event that led you to do it?
I've had an academic career. I started my academic career way back, it's almost 34, 35 years now. And the first 10 years, I was a pure academic. I was living in a glass house, collecting information, gaining knowledge, and sharing with my students. Okay? And there was a realization: is it really the reality, the ground reality? Okay. And I decided after 10 years to come out of this glass facade and face the world. Okay. And I said, I will learn by doing things, not just by reading and writing things, but by doing things. And that's how my sustainability journey started. Okay. And I started very small and I try to understand it. And as a principle, I do not recommend to anybody to do something unless I have tried it out myself. Okay, that is my principle. So my wife would say, we are the guinea pigs and we keep on trying many things at home before we can tell others. If things fail, many things have failed, I don't tell others. So first thing, I need to try it out, make sure that it works, it makes sense. Okay, and sometimes I have told people, for example, people have come to me saying that, can you please recommend a solar system for my rooftop? Okay, and I tell them, yeah, please hold on. Don't go for solar system. They say, you're anti-solar. I said, no, before doing solar, first see that how you can reduce your energy consumption. Because, demand and supply are the same, the two sides of the same coin. So if we can reduce our demand, we don't have to spend so much money on solar. Our house has a 3 kilowatt solar system, which takes care of all our requirements. House requirements, our transportation requirement, because the car is charged with that, two-wheelers are charged with that. ACs are run when there's requirement. But all our appliances that we use are chosen at the most efficient that you can find in the market. So I prefer to put the money first in those, as a result of which I can manage with a very small solar system, because I don't have to worry about maintaining a big system. Okay? And if we didn't do that, in most cases, you will not find enough rooftop to put the solar systems. Okay, so we have to have a look at the holistic manner and not just jump into saying that I do solar, that means I'm green. It may be more visible. Okay, so many people, hesitate and go away because they say, oh, this guy is not encouraging to put solar. I said, you have to also look at your return on investment. If I can put this fan and I get a return on investment of 40% or 45%, why would I go for a solar when my return on investment is only 10 to 12%? Okay, I would first get a benefit from there, and then I can go to the next one. So one has to be, reasonable, rational in making the decision, and not impulsive. Okay? Look at what are the benefits, look at the economic aspects, look at the environmental aspects, look at the social aspects, and we are educated, so we need to make an educated choice by which we see it's beneficial and not just impulsive saying that I will go for solar. So I wouldn't recommend people to go for solar if they have not done some basic things to be conscious that there are many other areas we can do things in a more cost-effective manner, and it can have more impact on the environment before you go for solar.
Right. That's great, sir. Thanks a lot. I think we've answered a lot of the questions that the speakers.
I just, have something to say. Initially, you had asked me to circulate it in my circle. And after I put it up LinkedIn, I realized that I did a mistake, because most of my friends in the LinkedIn are already converted. They're already in the path of sustainability. I have nothing to tell them. I'm more keen to find more people jumping on the bandwagon, particularly the youth, because that is your future. Okay, we have lived our life. We have created a mess. Now it's up to you to clean it up. You have to take the responsibility to make sure that your generation and the next generation takes care of it. So I'm very happy to talk to the young people and make sure that the message passes through, than to talk to my converted friends, because they have nothing to learn from me. And sometimes they don't change because, like you said, habits. I make a joke out of it. Habit is HABIT. When you take out H, a bit remains. When you take out a, bit remains. And when you take out B, it still remains. So habits are not easy to change. We have to make that conscious effort, thinking about what our responsibilities are, and slowly and surely we'll find ways. And when you do these changes, the joy that you get Okay? For example, putting a few plants on the rooftop to get some vegetables. They're nothing. They're not even covering maybe 2% of what I buy from the market. But the joy you get in plucking that vegetable puts you on the path of sustainability.
Right. And I think that's that's the key takeaways for the session, right? One of them is the fact that we should start really appreciating how privileged we are, which allows us to actually build that value system around us, right? That incentivizes us internally and motivates us to be able to get into that sustainable journey. And we shouldn't really be looking at us being salaried or self-employed or any of that, because key decisions of, like, one of the examples that you'd given when we spoke last time was the ability to just sit in a room without a suit. Why would you need an AC then to turn on, right? Simple decisions like that.
I'm wearing this. You can see.
Yeah, and I really like the namaste, so that was a that's a great touch to the shirt. But decisions like that, right, let you move a little closer to the sustainability path, and being sustainability is more along those lines, right? Taking up conscious decisions. And about your point of reaching out to many more people of our age group, I think we're definitely going to do that. So this session is going to go on YouTube as well as some of the podcast channels we're planning to start off. So yeah, I'm sure that your words are going to reach out to the people that haven't already converted to the right lifestyle, basically. So yeah, thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot for giving your time. It was
Thank
great
you.
talking to you before the session and during the session.
I would like to
Great
thank all the
discussion.
participants for taking time off from their weekend on a Saturday evening to come and listen to me. And if I have not been able to satisfy your requirements, do write to me. I'll definitely like to be in touch with you. And I'm very informal, so reach out to me and we can discuss on topics that are of your interest and my interest. And I can tell you, every session I also learn. The fact that last evening, I'll just finish with an anecdote. My daughter wrote to me, "Good luck." Got the message. She came to know because she was also invested in Paisa. I realized, and she said, "I've got a message," and she said, "Good luck." I said, "Good luck for what?" She said, "Oh, you're going to speak." I said, "I'm used to it." But then that put me in thoughts. This morning when I went out cycling, I started thinking, what should I say to reach out to the young people? So every time I get this opportunity, it's a learning experience for me. It's not just sharing, it's also learning. Whole life is a learning process. So I'm also learning in the process. Okay? So let's make use of these platforms to learn from each other and grow. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, sir. And to all the attendees who still stuck with us, thanks a lot for staying back. You guys gave some really good questions, and we got some lot of things to learn, actually. Feel free to check us out. I will put up a message on the Q&A, or I think there's Anurag on call, I guess. You can go ahead and type in pyse.in. That's pyse.in, and check us out. If our story of what we do can help you get more sustainable in any way, investing in sustainability, taking your first step and initiative, and we could be the guys to help you with it, that would be really great, right? Please check us out. Feel free to contact us. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, my other co-founder Vinay too. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. So once again, thanks a lot, guys. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.